Yo, what's good, guys? So I basically just want to make a video going over a setup that, confused plenty of us, including myself to a certain extent. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So as we can see in UCAD, if you've been following the all the weekly calls at 9 p.m. CST every Wednesday, or if you've been watching the recordings, there's something that you've seen me basically point out on UCAD, and that's this sell to buy candle. Right now, notice how this candle, right, is the last down move before the upside move, but also notice how this candle took out that previous week's liquidity point right there. Notice how this basically bearish move took out liquidity and then gave it the real rise, right? So that shows that there's some sort of order back there, etc., etc. So once we measure this specific candle here, we always point out two locations, the open, right? But more importantly, the 50%. And what do we see? We see price wick that and completely fly, right? So now let's see what's happening on a smaller time frame, right? From an intraday side. So up into that move, right? We start seeing corrective structure, right? But not only that, a sign that gave us this basically this move was going to happen was, notice this, right? What does this mean? This means that there is a diminishment in selling volume, selling pressure from liquidity providers, right? And not only that, but we're starting to see um, just basically a decline here, which is now leading to some sort of corrective structure in the actual chart, right? So now let's start zooming in more. Let me delete this real quick. Right, let's start zooming in more. Right, what do we see? We see liquidity start to be filled or start to be created, right, by relative equal lows. That means there's stop losses, sell stops, etc. And not only that, but we have the 50% of a weekly sponsored candle at 1.30468, right? So that just basically inclines me to think that price is going to come down here, and the only way for this to give you some sort of real answer or some sort of real move, you have to get a quick reaction. And as you can see, we were not in this basically area of price for more than 2 hours, right? And then notice once this liquidity is taken out, we get the real move to happen, right? Which is what caused structure to break, right? Structure was literally shattered right there. So now is when we can basically look for for some sort of safer entry, right? And notice that 2 days later we had CAD news, and that's what caused the big spike, right? Now what to keep in mind here is the fact that we had a shift of volume, and when you have a shift of volume, then you can automatically infer that you have some sort of accumulation schematic, right? Which means you can consider this whole thing here accumulation, right? So now is when you got to put your common sense, your logic into place, right? When it comes to Wyckoff, whenever you see accumulation, naturally you're only going to see reaccumulation afterwards before you see some sort of distribution schematic, right? And this reaccumulation doesn't have to happen once. It could happen 2 to 3 times, right? Which is why you see people getting faked out, guessing lows and guessing highs, because they're literally trying to sell reaccumulation and buy redistribution, So now that we have that in place, we see that we should now be potentially seeing some sort of reaccumulation, right? Although I didn't see this at first, I was actually planning on playing this sponsored candle here, right? As just like a lot of people did, right? But unfortunately, I didn't get this entry. So what did I do? I zoomed in, right? Let me delete this line, not necessary, right? This is the last. Well, this is our buy to sell move because this buy took out these 3 wicks of liquidity, and then we got our real move to the downside. So what do we measure? More importantly, 50% and open. But the 50% gave you that wick entry here, and this is where I took my risk for sells, right? After we broke the structure here, then I automatically went break even, right? So now that that's in place, right, I'm thinking this is just gonna fall and basically fill up this all of this inefficient pricing, right? But obviously that didn't happen. What actually happened was that this retracement here could be considered about 78.6 to 80, probably 88.6 retracement, right? Which is showing that these are essentially equal highs to a certain extent, right? Now, why is that important? Is because the difference between distribution and reaccumulation is that potential double top, because that's going to incline sellers to sell, right? So now let's pull this up. This is actually on the one of the documents that I gave you guys in the drive, right? So we see different variations of the same schematic, right? But in essence, they're all the same. It just has a small variation in steps, right? So what we see in UCAD is more of this reaccumulation with a spring, right? Because you see equal highs technically, then you see a support being created, support taken out so that you can then get the real move, right? And that's exactly what happened here, right? You start seeing equal lows starting to come up. Now we see price deliberately come to take those out before they made the real move to the upside. Now, how do you catch this move, right? Well, there's 2 ways to go about it, right? One, wrong time frame. Was it wrong time frame? Okay, no, it wasn't. Right, from this daily, right, based off of that inefficiency, right, from here to here, you get 50% before you skyrocket up, right? Or you can go zoom in and figure out what's really, really happening from an intraday perspective, right? So what do we see here? We see price give 1, 2 fat bullish candles, right? So now we can use something called the fixed volume profile range to tell us where the volume is in this move, right? So now what do we see? Right, we see that all of the volume is mainly here, and that makes sense because this could be considered some type of buy to sell move, whatever, right? Blah, blah, blah. So now, right, this is where we start looking at where price is, right? So notice how it's basically a dark bluish here and a dark yellowish, and then there's areas where you see literally nothing, right? So when you come and measure this, you want to separate the beginning and the low of that, because now this is giving you your range where you see basically price have inefficiency. So now this is your area of interest to buy, right? Let me fix this up a little bit. Yeah, now that makes more sense. So now based off of this, right, you see how there's literally almost zero to, basically little to none volume present here that shows that there's validity in this liquidity jump, gap, whatever, right? Skip a liquidity, whatever, right? So what do you want to do with this range? You want to measure it to 50% and look at where price rejected. Right, let's see everything else for clarity purposes. Look at where price rejected. All right, this basically gave five pips of drawdown before it went for over 100 pips. Right, isn't that lit? So now we start zooming in and we're going to see what actually happened. How do you get an entry? Because if you're just going off the limit, then that's going to be a bit tricky to play, right? So what do we see from this time frame here? Once again, we start seeing this steady decline in volume, right? Then we see the shift start to begin. Basically all this area here. And then that's after that when you see volume start to come rolling back in, whatever, right? Wherever you want to put this, but you get the point, right? So how do you interpret this, right? When you're looking at this like this, from this trend line perspective here, you're seeing diminishment of volume, meaning that there's less selling pressure in the market. The selling pressure is now exiting while the buyers are now entering, right? So notice how while we were shifting, right, we got basically two spikes of bearish liquidity, but the candles aren't supporting what the volume is saying. Therefore, based off of, Wyckoff rules, based off the rule of volume, right, there's effort being shown to push lower, but it's obviously not working. What does that mean? That's showing a sign of strength. That means that you could be potentially seeing some sort of upside potential, right? And after that happens, which is around here, now we get one last move to the downside to take out all previous liquidity. But notice, while this drop is happening, if I go to volume, there's no volume supporting it. Now, what does that mean? That just means that this could be more than likely a false move. So this is now where you would want to take risk, right? Where we're basically seeing zero volume supporting a strong impulse to move to the downside. That means that's something that's being deliberately caused in order to take out, buy side liquidity, right? So as you can see, there's no volume supporting it. So inevitably this is going to wound, which is what it did, So that would have been anywhere here your entry to just take that up, right? You just got a spring of reaccumulation. This could go far, especially from a higher time frame perspective. So now that that's out the way, you see how we would have entered in this scenario in order to continue higher, right? So let me delete this. So now you caught your spring, and not only that, but you took out your structure. So now, as you can see, price is starting to move up. You got the volume shift, you got the structure break, there's nothing more else you can want, right? So now when you're looking at this from the schematic, right, you see after the spring, it takes out all liquidity before it continues higher. And what did price do? It spring, it took out all previous liquidity, it accounted for inefficient pricing, and then it skyrocketed, right? $100 pips, it's not too bad. So yeah, like as you can see, we have our support being created here. Now we see a spring, account for that inefficiency before it can actually now do the real upside move, right? So now, based off of this weekly closure, we could see this start either mooning hard or it'll reject anywhere around the 50% of this candle. What am I counting on? Honestly, it looks like it wants to just fly, especially because you did have a bullish engulfing on a weekly time frame, you know? So yeah, this is more of a matter of just seeing what it wants to do, just because technically this is one fat range on a weekly time frame. So yeah, it's just a matter of experience, guys. Just understanding what you're looking at and being able to interpret, what you see. Right? So yeah, guys, I hope this was informational to y'all. Just to show y'all basically why the sell bias on UCAD was invalid and how you could have done better to basically catch a better move. So yeah, guys, till next time.